Now we turn to diplomacy, a new milestone in relations between China and countries of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN. Chinese President Xi Jinping has announced the establishment of the China-ASEAN Comprehensive Strategic Partnership at a virtual summit marking 30 years of dialogue relations between the two sides Monday morning. And for more on that, let's cross live to our correspondents Ryan Malta in Kuala Lumpur and Li Jianhua in Beijing. Let me start with you, Ryan. Tell us more about the highlights of Monday morning's virtual summit.
Yes, well, undoubtedly, as you mentioned, the highlight is the agreement to forge this comprehensive strategic partnership to build on, deepen, strengthen and broaden the ties in all number of areas between ASEAN and China. This comes, of course, after ASEAN and China already have a well-established free trade agreement and are now partners in this huge free trade deal, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership. But a comprehensive strategic partnership just opens the possibilities of cooperation and collaboration in a whole number of other spheres, and just generally to deepen that collaboration. In a sense, this summit was building on last month's ASEAN-China summit, which happened on the sidelines of the main ASEAN summit, virtually hosted by Brunei, and a number of the same topics continued to crop up. So one would be, of course, the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, with several of the ASEAN countries yet to ratify this deal, although they signed it a year ago. Malaysia is among those. So the push is for these countries to quickly sign the deal, ratify the deal, so that it can kick into gear, and that can help accelerate the economic recovery for the region. As well, of course, the South China Sea issue crops up time and time again at this summit, with 4 of the ASEAN countries having overlapping territorial claims with China. Now, Malaysia really sort of emphasized what ASEAN's general position and tone is on these disagreements. He said that Malaysia upholds its own claim in the South China Sea, but it also reiterates its belief that the only way to resolve these disputes is through peaceful and cordial dialogue. But above all, this summit is really about emphasizing how far ASEAN-China relations have come over the past 30 years and laying the groundwork for that to continue and even deepen as we move forward.
Indeed, and there has been cooperation between the two sides, but some differences remain. So let's talk a little bit more about this historical milestone. 30 years of dialogue relations between China and ASEAN. How do ASEAN member countries view this partnership with China?
Well, the way that they view it has transformed over the 30 years as China has become a much more important partner for the region, really mirroring China's development of the global stage of becoming a manufacturing powerhouse, a major investor as well. I would say that clearly ASEAN countries view China as a vital trade partner, a vital investment partner, and increasingly important strategic partner as well. And I think that some of the ASEAN countries would look to China as a model of development in many ways. Maybe it's not something they could emulate, but it's something they could aspire to. And particularly when it comes to poverty alleviation, the less developed ASEAN countries will look to China for assistance in sort of adapting the China model to help these countries alleviate their poverty. And I think it was apt and it's understandable that in many ways ASEAN was the first major stepping stone for China as this transformation took place in China, with something like 60 to 70% of the global Chinese diaspora living in Southeast Asia, and with long historical, cultural and trade ties. So it was only appropriate, fitting and natural really that China's development on the global stage would sort of first be seen in a very tangible way in ASEAN, with this massive increase in trade, 85-fold increase in trade over the 30 years of this dialogue partnership. Absolutely astounding.
Thank you very much, our correspondent Ryan Malta in Kuala Lumpur. Now let's go to Li Jianhua in Beijing. Jianhua, let's be specific on trade. And Ryan just mentioned this big picture, 85-fold in the past 3 decades. Tell us a little bit more about the recent momentum.
Yes, Brandon, we know that economic cooperation has been one of the highlights of China-ASEAN relations. It has recorded or witnessed the most notable changes over the past 3 decades. And the two sides established dialogue relations in 1991 back then. And we know the trade volume was less than $8 billion US in 2020. Nearly 30 years apart, the trade volume surpassed $680 billion with an average annual growth rate of nearly 17%. That's a lot. And despite headwinds from the pandemic, the trade volume in the first half of this year was over $400 billion. That is up by nearly 28% on a yearly basis. So as for economic cooperation, we know China and ASEAN are already each other's biggest trading partners, and the Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, or RCEP, is set to take effect next year. So bringing together 15 Asia-Pacific countries, it accounts for 30% of the world's GDP and nearly 30% of the world's population. So besides, China has also applied to join the CPTPP, and China and ASEAN do have a great deal of common interest in terms of economic cooperation. Pandeng.
And Jianhua, what about mutual trust? We know Chinese President Xi Jinping has just announced the establishment of the China-ASEAN Comprehensive Strategic Partnership at a virtual summit on Monday. What does this entail in reality?
Yeah, you're right. It is an announcement to establish this strategic comprehensive partnership, and we know the focus is comprehensive. That is the key word, and that is for sure the most important message from the summit. It's the highest level of relationship possible between governments, and this means their relationship will go further than simply trade agreements. We have been talking about trade agreements a lot, and both sides are expected to align laws as well as security this time with a new or upgraded partnership signed. So this is definitely a milestone of China-ASEAN relations. As for the future relations, if we look at President Xi Jinping's proposals, they come in this particular order. The first two are focused on peace, then a prosperous home, then a beautiful home that is about ecological conservation. The last one is about amicable home together. So what is likely to dominate the future relations from what we can see is maintaining regional stability. The strategic comprehensive partnership is likely to play a positive role in stabilizing regional security in the South China Sea, of course. China and ASEAN have been holding talks for years to draft a code of conduct to avoid confrontation, and such a draft was made in 2018, but little progress has been made. But now with the upgraded partnership signed, it is unlikely tensions will turn into open conflict. As for a prosperous home, it refers to a slew of measures to shore up economic cooperation on both sides, including RCEP, China-ASEAN Free Trade Area, Belt and Road Cooperation. China has also applied to join the CPTPP, as said, which is set to boost their trade volumes. So apart from security, there shall be more cooperation on combating the pandemic. So far, China has delivered nearly 360 million doses of vaccines to ASEAN members, and ASEAN also donated medical supplies to support China when the coronavirus broke out in Wuhan in 2020, as we remember. So the upgraded partnership will for sure make a difference in multiple areas in the near future. Back to you, Pandong.
Thank you very much, our reporter Li Jianhua in Beijing. Staying with the topic, a trans-Asian high-speed railway linking China with Singapore is one of the most striking examples of cooperation between China and ASEAN. China is working with 3 ASEAN member countries, namely Laos, Thailand and Malaysia, to help build a huge network. Martin Low has been looking at progress in Thailand, the vital midsection of the line.
It's a massive undertaking and a true inter-country partnership. Thailand is carrying out the civil engineering, deciding the route, limiting environmental impact and preparing the ground. China, with its experience in high-speed networks, will lay the tracks, erect signals and supply the trains. At first, China will operate and maintain the system, but in future will hand over control to Thailand, remaining as an advisor. Trains will run at up to 250 kilometers per hour, transforming Thailand's aging rail network.
China is paying a lot of attention to this project, and we have good cooperation. It is seen as important because it is one of the first Chinese high-speed railways to be built outside China. The first half of the line will be designed by China, but the second will be designed by Thailand to the Chinese standard.
Thailand's first high-speed route will run for 600 kilometers from the Laos border to the capital, Bangkok. Construction's going ahead daily on Phase 1, connecting Bangkok to the midpoint of the route here at Nakhon Ratchasima. Trains should be running by 2026. By the end of the decade, the line should be open all the way to the Laos border. The line through Laos, which will run at medium speed, is almost ready to open, whilst Malaysia says it remains committed to its part of the project. Thailand's rail scheme will cost up to $17 billion, but the country expects to see major investment and development along the route. Martin Low, CGTN, Nakhon Ratchasima, Thailand.
For more insight into this, let's talk to Mr. Teng Jianqun from the China Institute of International Studies. Thank you very much for joining us, Mr. Teng. So let's start with this major announcement from Chinese President Xi Jinping Monday morning, the establishment of China-ASEAN Comprehensive Strategic Partnership. Is it common for a country and a bloc to establish relations like this?
Yeah, this is a very important cooperation among the countries in this region. For example, the political cooperation. Actually, China has given a very important support for the stability and peace in this region. And in terms of trade, ASEAN used to be a very important partner for China in trade, and also China gave very important support, for example, in the financial crisis in 1997. And in regional security, the cooperation, of course, is another aspect for the good relations between the two sides. So at this moment, I think China would like to continue such a momentum to have a comprehensive cooperation, not only in particular in trade, but also in some other areas, including the peace and stability in the South China Sea, and also to have some cooperation in regional affairs. For example, the pandemic fighting at this moment, the two sides gave very good cooperation, and of course, China would like to share its achievements of recent open up and reform. And the Road and Belt Initiative did give a very positive impact on the regional development, especially in some countries, as you mentioned just now.
Mr. Teng, let's talk a little bit more about trade. Just as you mentioned, RCEP will come into force since the start of the new year, and also we know that some members of ASEAN are also signatories to the CPTPP, and China is now applying for membership of that as well. How will huge trade deals like this be a booster to both China and ASEAN?
Actually, such mechanism or RCEP will give some escalation of cooperation in regional trade and economic cooperation. For example, ASEAN countries have already become the #1 trade partner in recent years, especially after the United States initiated so-called strategic competition with China. And ASEAN, of course, has some complementarities with China, especially in regional development. This is actually a era for the globalization of world economy, including the supply chain or production chain for the countries concerned to go together, because we need such a cooperation, and we should cooperate in some areas. For example, the regional development, not only in trade, but also in the concept of cooperation and to maintain the stable relations among all the countries in this region and some other countries that involved in such a cooperation. So I think in terms of the RCEP and some other regional cooperation in trade or in economy, we should continue such effort to escalate the cooperation in this regard.
Mr. Teng, do you think the United States is willing to see cooperation and ties go smoothly between China and ASEAN? Because we know politically the United States has proposed this so-called Indo-Pacific idea to contain China militarily. It has been stirring the situation in the South China Sea, and trade-wise it has proposed something new, totally out of the already existing CPTPP.
Yeah, this is actually a so-called competition with China by the United States. Actually, in recent at least 4 or 5 years, the United States has already enhanced its cooperation with ASEAN countries. This is a good cooperation for any country, even not in this region. But I think the United States still has its own intention to, compete with China in the cooperation with ASEAN countries. We have witnessed the frequent visit by the U.S. officials. For example, the Secretary of Defense Austin paid a visit to ASEAN countries, and even the Vice President Harris also paid a visit to Singapore, to Vietnam. And it's quite unusual for the United States to give such frequent visits by the senior officials of the government. Why? Because they would like to take ASEAN country as a main battlefield for the competition with China. I'm sure the ASEAN countries are quite familiar with the tricky policy by the United States, and Singapore Prime Minister also mentioned they don't like to see the competition, such a competition that will give a negative impact on the peace and stability in ASEAN countries. So I think the United States should abandon the zero-sum game thought or idea toward China or toward the cooperation in this region, and only a win-win cooperation can give the United States some benefit and give the benefit to the regional countries and to China.
Thank you very much, Mr. Teng Jianqun from the China Institute of International Studies.